hello, everybody. I don't know if Jake is here on the show yet because he just gave me a thumbs up right before we went live, and it triggered fireworks on his Mac, and it crashed his camera, and you're very laggy now, and here we are live. But so
Jeez.
Jake's in some sort of
I'm gonna power cycle.
Yeah, you power cycle. I'll introduce our guest today, Andrew McCarthy. How's it going? Welcome to the show.
Please do.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me on here. Excited to talk with you guys.
We have been not low key. We've just been loving your photography and creeping on your work for so long, and we were like, man, we really gotta. When did we recently start talking about it again, Jake? Probably the epic. I know what picture it was. I'm just gonna tease everyone with the most epic picture of all time, the ISS and the moon in the most sci-fi scene that I've seen in my life. And we were like, man, we really got to have Andrew on the show to talk about.
Yeah, that picture sold it right there.
Yeah. Well, it was that, and Jake was like, I really want to get into astrophotography. I've always thought about it, and I am now he used to live in Vancouver, and now he lives in a less cloudy place. And so you're here to help him, to convince him to spend a lot of money.
I'll do what I can.
So
appreciate it.
Yeah. Jake, while your camera works, did you bring anything fun to drink today?
I did. I got a story and everything today. All right.
Wow.
Yeah. So today is November 30th, which here in Yucatan, the Day of the Dead stuff is like a little different than the rest of Mexico. So they're like, it's more tightly integrated with like the Mesoamerican stuff here. So in the Maya have this holiday called Hanal Tishan. And so it starts, November 1st and it ends today. So it's like a month-long kind of thing that they do. So today is when all the spirits that all your ancestors came back to visit you, and now they're going home on the last day of Hanal Tishan, on Bishmesh they call it. So
Coco was a lie. Coco was a single day storyline, and that's a lie.
Well, it's
I always thought it seemed rushed.
More properly like Dia de Muertos, right? But so this is Hanal, Hanal Pishan is the name of the holiday here, and this is a local
a little ofrenda. That's great.
Yeah, with a little ofrenda with a beer on top of it, right? How cool is that? So yeah, this is what I got here, and it's a. Do you see that? What kind of beer it is there? Did you see that?
No, it's very blurry. A pumpkin ale.
Estilo pumpkin. I love it.
All right.
So cheers, yeah.
Andrew, I know you've got something cool over there.
Yeah, I poured myself some scotch. We'll see. I've been recovering from the flu, so I haven't had any alcohol inside me for a while. So this might hit me really
might
really
set
hard.
you back another week. Yeah. If he drops off on the productivity side of things for the next week, you can thank us.
We'll see.
I've got maybe the most fun named beer that I've had on the show, Jake. I've got a Long John's. Yeah, some yards here in Philly. Wow. Long John's. Look at that, a winter ale. I went out and purchased the. I realized if you don't jump on the winter beers right away, they go away pretty quick. So I had to pre-purchase 3 weeks in advance for our Off-Nominal show, the Mad Elf. I missed last year's batch of Mad Elf, the 14% Christmas cherry beer. So I did buy my 6-pack today, and I'll keep it cold for a couple weeks. But Long John's.
All right, cool.
How good is Long John's? Come on.
We both got a hyper local beers today.
Super local. Yeah, this is a real, really. Andrew's like, what have I gotten into?
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how the alcohol affects the podcast. Actually, usually
you're also early, right? You're in Arizona.
Yeah, it's only 2:00 here.
Yeah. Well, that's right. It's only 2:00 because of the daylight saving situation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That really. What was happening? I'm trying to remember what the storyline was. Oh, when I was out in Arizona in like June, like a couple years ago, and we were day tripping up to Page. And so we threw on the navigation and start driving, and we were going to Antelope Canyon and some of the areas around there, and the Google Maps "you will arrive at" time was pulling the Utah time zone, not the Arizona time zone. So an hour into my drive, I looked down and I was like, Katie, are we in a time warp? We left at the right time, right? What happened between here and there? And then it took us a couple seconds to be like, oh, this is probably just state line date issues. So that's always, I'm sure that's fun for you to flip back and forth.
Yeah, I just drove up to Utah for that eclipse, the annular eclipse, and I was getting really confused with my navigation because it's like my arrival day or my arrival time was like not what I expected it to be, and I was like, "Am I gonna hit traffic? What's going on?"
And that's the same thought. It's like, man, there must be a real accident because there is. You're on the one road. It's not like there's a lot of options on how else to get there. So.
Exactly.
So we have some brotherhood in that we're both in places that don't do the daylight savings, which means that we suffer through the terrible thing twice a year where the whole world changes time around us and we have to figure out what time everything is at. I've kind of come to the idea that not doing daylight savings might actually be harder until everyone else stops doing it too.
True.
Yeah. This is where the listeners will discover that I'm like the one daylight saving stan in the world, and I have reason. Don't yell yet. Like, this is my one thing. I'm sitting like a half a mile from where it was invented, so it makes perfect sense exactly where I am, both longitudinally and latitudinally. It works out really well for my timeline, and I realize that greatly afflicts me as to my opinions on the matter. So, yeah. Thank you, Ben. All right, let's talk about some astrophotography, Jake. Let's start spending your money.
All right,
Andrew, I think it would be fun to hear an origin story for people that don't know what you're up to today. Maybe hear about what you're working on, but I'd love to hear about how you got started in it and your journey into the photography that you do.
Well, it was kind of on accident actually that I discovered this. Growing up, I was always a little bit of a nerd. My dad actually had a telescope. They let me look through, so I saw like the planets, just visually through his telescope growing up, and that was probably a huge influence on me. And I was just like a huge Trekkie. I was like watching Star Trek all the time. All of my toys were like Star Trek, so it's like obviously it was like kind of rooted in me from a young age. I didn't really think about it too much until I think it was like on a whim. I was just thinking fondly back, looking through my dad's telescope, and I was like, "Why don't I just buy myself a telescope? I'm an adult with a job. I can afford this." And I bought a. I think it was about $600. It was this. It was a 10-inch Dobsonian telescope. Very, very simple type of telescope. It's basically just like a big tube with two mirrors in it.
Yeah, big one, 10-inch.
It's the easiest thing in the world to use, and I set this thing up and I put it in my backyard and I just pointed at the first bright-ish object I saw, which happened to be Jupiter. So a little bit of luck there that it happened to be like just perfectly situated south of my backyard when I got this thing set up. And I looked through it immediately. I'm just like, oh my God, it's Jupiter. This is amazing. And tried to take a photo through my smartphone. I think I had like an iPhone 6 or whatever it was at the time. And the pictures turned out like absolutely terrible. The planet's like so bright compared to like the blackness of space around it that your camera just doesn't know how to focus on it, because it's just like so outside of the types of things that they're designed to take photos of. So I spent like just a ton of time just trying to see if I could just figure it out, just using like my phone's like you touch on the bright spot and try to like
that annoying. Oh, I kind of drifted. I'm not exactly over the eyepiece anymore.
So like the aperture sliding with your finger.
Yeah, it doesn't really work too well with a smartphone. You can actually, with modern smartphones, there's a lot more controls on them now, and some of them are actually able to do a decent job with astrophotography. But what I had just was not working. So I spent like all this time like just went down this like rabbit hole of research and discovered that like amateur astrophotography was a thing. Like I didn't even know it was a thing. Like I knew obviously like astronomy was a thing that you could do from your backyard, like, but I just assumed that like to take pictures you needed like a space telescope or something. Like I didn't really I guess understand how accessible this stuff was. So I stumbled across like there's like a whole community on Reddit, the astrophotography community on Reddit, and all these people take photos of nebulas and galaxies from the backyard. I'm like, how the heck do you do this? And I spent just tons of time just like poring over like people like share kind of the details of how they capture their image. There's like, I was like, what the heck is an equatorial mount? And basically that's like the key to astrophotography is figuring out a way to cancel out the rotation of the Earth, because if you're trying to do a long exposure on something faint that's up there, like galaxies, nebulas, they're very faint. You have to do a really long exposure to see them at all. But when you do that, the stars and stuff all streak across the sky, and your photo looks terrible and blurry. So an equatorial mount was kind of like the foundation of astrophotography, because it allows you to compensate for Earth's motion and basically just freeze whatever you're pointing at, so you can do a long exposure. So you can do exposures of many, many, many hours, hundreds of hours if you wanted to, and just accumulate the photons that are being collected by your telescope over a period of several nights. And that's how you get these really amazing photos of nebulas and galaxies. So, figuring that out, I bought some equipment and kind of just started to take some photos I was finally proud of. And that was, would have been like maybe early 2019 when I first bought my equatorial mount and kind of got into this. It's just been just every time it's just trying to get a little bit further, a little more detail, a little deeper into space. That's kind of been my journey.
2019, you were a couple months later, this hobby onset, you were shit out of luck. There was no telescopes to buy if you were like just a little later than you were. So good timing on that one.
Yeah, that's true. After the pandemic, it got really hard to buy stuff. As all the supply chains got disrupted, and everybody's bored at home. They're like, I want to get into astrophotography. So.
Yeah, drunk in their backyard. Hey, what if I did stuff up there?
Yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah.
So were you were like digging the planetary stuff with the Dobsonian, but were you like, when did you start thinking about nebulas? Was it the subreddit, or were you always like, I don't know, I'm more of a planets guy myself, and my interest in looking through my telescopes, but I know there's people that are like, I only like deep space objects. What did you have a particular thing, or were you just like, I don't know, let's see where my interests fall?
I'm kind of interested in all of it. I don't really have like a preference. You're really limited by the atmosphere when it comes to planets. So I really can only shoot planets when the atmospheric turbulence is at a minimum. The seeing conditions are really good. Otherwise, everything just looks blurry. So when conditions are good, it's incredible. It's like I can get these like really nice crisp images of planets with, I can even resolve details on the moons of Jupiter, which I thought was impossible. Very recently, like a few years ago, I would have thought it was impossible to resolve details on Ganymede, for example. But I can do that. I can do that with my equipment when the conditions are really good. Now, when conditions aren't as good, and you're like nebulas and galaxies are like really big from like an angular size standpoint. Like I think most people actually don't have a frame of reference for this, but you don't really need a lot of magnification to see nebulas. Like most of the nebulas I photograph are like way bigger than the moon in the sky, just to like, blow some minds of people that are listening. If they were brighter, they would be like really huge in the sky, like just these massive things that you could easily see with your naked eye, if they were brighter. The problem is they're just very faint, of course. So I don't need like really good steady conditions to shoot those and have the photos look good. I just need clear skies. I live in Arizona though, so plenty of clear skies here.
Yeah, it's your specialty.
But I find nebulas to me are the most fun to photograph because interesting thing about nebulas, they're almost all red. So like emission nebulas, they're like all like this kind of uniform red. It's like this very, very distinct color. It's a hydrogen alpha emission line. Basically, you got hydrogen that's being ionized by starlight and it glows fluorescent. And it makes all nebulas red. There's also, of course, blue nebulas that's caused by Rayleigh scattering, very similar to why our sky is blue. But because they're overwhelmingly hydrogen, you can get really creative with color balancing out the hydrogen and resolve other things in there. I capture in multiple emission lines. I'm capturing sulfur, I'm capturing oxygen, I'm capturing hydrogen, and I color balance them to where I can bring out these other elements, and the nebula is no longer red in the photography. And because of that, I really love nebula photography because it gives you more creative control over how you're actually photographing it, because you're not ending up with the same photo as everybody else, just depending on your discretion, how much of those other fainter emission lines you want to pull out of the nebula. So you end up with like these really like vivid, like colorful photos, and it's like entirely almost your discretion at how much you bring this out. For that reason, I find that each nebula photo is almost like it's a little work of art in itself, and it's less about the mathematics of how do you capture this accurately, and like with planets, there isn't really any discretion. It's like you shoot it, it's exactly how the planet looks, and how good the photo is really just comes down to how good are your conditions and how good is your execution. Nebulas aren't really like that. There's all these different ways that you can adjust your color palettes and bring out different things in the nebula. It's like, this photo you have up at the Orion Nebula, that looks different than every other photo of the Orion Nebula you'll see because it's uniquely mine. And it's almost like I'm painting with photons, which is incredible.
This is an unreal, like the detail in this is just crazy.
It's wild.
it's I get lost looking at these kind of pics. Just how much is going on.
Nebulas always blow my mind because, like, so you talk about how big they are, like from an angular perspective, but just from an absolute perspective as well. Like, these look like clouds, but this is such a large space that if you were in the middle of it, you wouldn't know because all the little pieces of that nebula are so far apart. Like, that's how big of a thing this is. You wouldn't know you were in it. It would just be empty space. That's wild to me.
And it looks this cool.
And it looks like that.
Yeah. Man, this feels like I'm in a college dorm again. This is great. This is like, what is in your ofrenda over there, Jake?
I just gotta tell you. Hold on. I just gotta tell you a little bit about this nebula. Yeah.
What's crazy, this one is so bright too that you can actually capture it with just a smartphone, no telescope. You can literally just hold up your cell phone, take a long exposure of like that part of the Orion, and you can see the nebula because it's bright. It's bright and it's big and it's right there. So this is like #1 for amateur targets.
Yeah.
Anybody, if you have a DSLR and a tripod, you can get a photo of this nebula, like easy.
What's your favorite nebula? What's your power ranking?
It's usually whichever one I'm working on at the time.
Whichever one's closest to what you're interested in, yeah.
Yeah, it's like so Orion Nebula is probably my favorite because I keep coming back to it, and depending on your skill level, it kind of covers like every skill level. Like, when I was first starting out, I could get a photo of it that I was happy with, and now as I approach it with like new expertise and I shoot it again, I'm able to get more out of it, like more details that I wasn't able to resolve when I was more of an amateur. So it's like it kind of the nebula kind of supports whatever skill level of the photographer, which makes it a really fun object to shoot. And there's always more to discover, like little knots, tangled knots of gases and little star clusters that you see that you didn't see the last time. There's always something new to discover in these photos. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite nebulas. Really big fan of the Lagoon Nebula too. It's just there's something about that one that's just like it's just the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, look it up. It's beautiful. I have lots of photos of it. And actually, I think all of my photos of Lagoon Nebula, actually, except for maybe with the exception of one, are actually true color. So that Orion Nebula photo is false color because it was captured using narrowband filters that don't accurately translate into RGB. So there's like a color palette shift, which is the best way I can describe it. It's not like people say, oh, the colors are all fake, and it's not exactly the way it works. It's more like it's more like a trick of the color balancing, what you use to resolve some of the fainter emission lines. But the Lagoon Nebula is like, oh yeah, there you go, you found one. Very vivid, like pinks, and like the core is blue because there's reflection nebula within the core, and the starlight, in addition to ionizing the hydrogen gas, it's also reflecting off of just like faint gases and dusts, which scatters the same way it does when it enters our atmosphere. So you get this like blue core to it because of the reflection nebula. So yeah, absolutely
Pretty
stunning
sci-fi
nebula.
looking nebula. Yeah.
It's very bright too. Like you can actually see it with your naked eye. I pick it out. It's one of my favorite things to like pick out with binoculars. Oh, hey, look, that's one of my first photos of that nebula ever.
Yeah,
like,
I was just gonna say I would love to talk about this a little bit. Like, given what you were talking about with Orion, you know, starting here, started out here. Now I'm here. Like, yeah. What's like? Talk about the progression in a target like this. Is it you know, upgrading your techniques and understanding how to capture the stuff better, but also figuring out which pieces to capture more like that. I feel like that's part of what you're talking about with how big these nebula are. That you could probably figure out like, oh, actually the cool part is, I thought the cool part was the whole thing. The cool part is this part over in this area.
I honestly think it's all cool. Like no matter like what part you're photographing, like there's so much to explore and discover in every nebula. So this particular one, so the main difference between those two photos is the acquisition time that went into capturing it. The first one, or like the older one, I captured that in like, it must have been like 2018 or something. It was like right when I got started. That is a single 30-second exposure captured using a 10-inch telescope.
Wow.
I couldn't figure out how to get my photos to stack very, very consistently. And stacking photos is really key to doing very long exposures on them, because you're not just going to do like one like 10-hour exposure. If doing that, it would just blow out the sensor on your camera, and it would just be white and noisy, and it just wouldn't look very good. The trick is doing a lot of sub exposures and then stacking them together, and you actually get this. You're able to gather the same amount of photons if you were just leave your shutter open, but you're not blowing out your sensor. So the problem with this original image is that you see the stars are so big and bloated and white. It's called they're oversaturated is basically what it means. But because of that, the stacking algorithms couldn't actually align and stack my individual subframes, and I didn't know why at the time, but I was like, whatever. I still got a photo of a nebula. It's still cool.
Yeah.
But
yeah, still
now,
a great
course,
shot. Yeah, people would be like,
thanks.
"Wow, look at you! You really know what's going on." So.
Yeah, I mean, it's still cool. It's amazing. You're looking at a stellar nursery right there, and you're seeing some of the ionization of the hydrogen in there. So you can see like those hints of pink and blues. That was straight out of camera. I didn't like process that or anything. Like, it's just how it looked. But when you start stacking photos and you capture, hundreds of photos over a period of like 8 to 12 hours, and you stack them all together using software, and you can then extract even fainter dust and all these other things going on inside that nebula that you can't really capture normally, because they're kind of outside the dynamic range capabilities of the camera. If you have a very bright core of a nebula and like these faint like outer wispy stuff, it's like you literally can't capture them in a single photograph, because of just the dynamic range limitations. So stacking photos increases your dynamic range a lot.
So what kind of software do you use to do that with? Like, I'm curious about how manual is it, or do you have some sort of automated kind of pipeline set up to do all this kind of thing?
So for an image like that, I would use PixInsight most likely. PixInsight is a very specialized astronomy software, and it's got all the tools you need to stack an image and then process out whatever you need. Deep Sky Stacker is like a very free version that like most people start with, where you can just plug in your raw frames, calibration frames, and then it'll spit out a stacked image. That image would look pretty terrible. Like, it's very unprocessed, it's very raw still, but it would give you like this 32-bit TIFF file that you can then import into Photoshop or something, and then you can bring out everything that's hidden in the data of that image. Really, most the bulk of astrophotography processing just comes down to stretching the image, where you get an image that almost looks like it's completely black with just like a few stars in it, and then you brighten it up until you see the deep space object within it. And most of the processing just comes down to doing that process correctly.
Jake's like,
but you can do pretty much everything with free software.
What's this free one called again? I'm like Googling all these things at the same
Deep
time.
Sky
You said
Stacker. I put in the links in the show notes for everybody.
Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
Deep Sky Stacker.
Well,
Okay,
I'm gonna have a
all right,
links
I'm
in the
looking
show
this
notes
up.
and a shopping list for Jake. So it's gonna be great.
Deepskystacker.free.fr, is that the right website?
I think it is.
I think that sounds right.
I mean,
A
does
lot
that
of these,
domain like not shout legitimacy to you, Jake, or what? What's your problem with .free.fr? You know,
Just go to deepskystacker.totallynotavirus.ru.
PayPal, Anthony. I'll send you a copy.
I've put it on every single one of my computers, so hopefully it's not a virus.
Okay, good.
You're DDoSing the whole internet right now, but you've got great photos, so you know.
Oh, wow.
Horsehead.
Yeah,
I'm a Horsehead guy. Horsehead is what's up. I love me some Horsehead.
Horsehead is extremely
jam.
cool.
Look at this, Jake.
Yeah, I love it. It's really good. The colors
And
on
this
these
is,
are very cool. I like these.
And that's true color. The Horsehead Nebula is it's very vivid red. And you've got these reflection nebula in there, so they're glowing blue from the relay scattering from starlight bouncing off the dust. But there's so many like little pockets in this image that just, I don't know. It's the way that gases get sculpted by the insane physics within nebula.
Yeah.
You don't see these shapes anywhere else in nature.
It's crazy stuff.
These like, I don't know, these like towering columns, like that's a couple light years tall. That thing.
Right.
Yeah,
I love it.
They're huge. They're huge. They're like, they would dwarf our entire solar system.
It reminds me, like this scene of a nebula always reminds me of like when you go to the beach and it's sunset and the sun is just right and you can see the tops of the clouds that are over the horizon, and they're just kind of like weird perspective on it because you know that it's like a giant cloud, but it's just right there and it's just the top and it looks really cool and it's illuminated strangely and it doesn't make any sense with the rest of the sky, and it's just like you're peering over into another part of the world in a very cool way. And I love those little like wispy bits because it probably looks as cool as a Horsehead, but you know, from a different angle. And from our angle, it's like, what is that peeking through right there? And what's going on that side of the nebula?
Yeah.
That's so good.
So what do you do from like a camera perspective? Like, are you just grabbing like any old DSLR and just like mounting it into a telescope somehow? Or is there like kind of a special camera that you would use for something like this?
So you can use a DSLR. I do use DSLRs for some stuff. I use like this. I have a Sony A7 II right here that I use for a lot of stuff. And then somewhere, I don't know where I put it. There's a 6D over here that I use sometimes too. The 6D is astro-modded. So the challenge with DSLRs for astrophotography is nebulas are actually very, very, very close to infrared light. The hydrogen alpha emission line is just very close, and as a result, the signal actually gets clipped by the built-in UV IR filters that are inside your DSLR. Because of that, it actually you can't get a true true color nebula photo using a DSLR because you're clipping too much of that red signal.
Is that like red eye filter? Is that the same thing that they're trying to block out?
No.
Oh, okay.
The red eye. Red eye isn't it just like a flash to
it's
get
a flash hitting the back of your hitting the back of your cornea and coming back. Yeah, the way to eliminate red eye is look at the flash rather than the lens, and it will never reflect right back to the lens. Pro tip for everybody out there.
Brilliant. Or just have red eye reduction where it
wear sunglasses.
Or close your eyes and just blink in it.
Close your eyes, yeah.
I just never have my photo taken. That's how I get around it. So.
Anyways, yes, while I do use DSLRs, I actually use very special astronomy cameras for most of my stuff. Like this one right here is called a 224 MC. It's funny, I actually have a lens on it right now, but usually you don't have a lens on these cameras. But it looks like I just took the lens off, and you can see there's like just a little tiny sensor in there. And all these cameras are basically is like a sensor with like some very basic electronics and a heat sink. And they feed the photo data directly into a PC. So you're able to download the data directly to your computer into whatever capture software you're running. The reason they're designed like this, for one, so much of what what's in these photos, or sorry, in these cameras, is actually like processing software that you don't want. You know, the moment you take a photo using a DSLR, it kind of runs through a lot of processing already. Like it goes through noise reduction, it goes through color balancing, it does all these things. When you're doing astrophotography, you want that the photo to be as raw as possible. Because you're going to be stacking it, and you need to really preserve that source data as good as you can. So if the camera is doing any kind of processing on it, it's going to corrupt that image in a way you don't want. So yes, definitely you need to be shooting raw. And when you're using a telescope, you also like really want to pay close attention to your pixel scale. So there's this relationship between the size of your pixels and the light that's coming in to them. So you can look at your focal ratio of your telescope and actually choose a camera with the appropriate pixel size based on that. Otherwise, if your pixels are too small, you could oversample the image, and it actually takes you longer to record an image because the pixels are so small that they're almost like, if you think of a pixel on a camera sensor as like a bucket collecting photons. If the bucket is too small, it gets really hard to capture a photo of something that's very faint. So the ideal pixel size can be dependent on the telescope and the nature of the light going in it. So I actually use completely different cameras designed very differently for deep sky photos versus for like the moon, the sun, and planets, because they have very different requirements based on the telescope.
So what's the one that you had? I think is the deep sky go-to, right? That 224 MC.
This is actually a planetary camera. I actually don't use this one very much anymore. It's just a little bit older now. The newer ones are a little better, but it's still a great camera to start with because it's pretty cheap. I think it was like $200, and it's actually pretty good.
Even cheaper now. I think it's red now, so that's fun, and it's $149.
Oh yeah, I mean it's. Yeah, I think they're having a sale right now.
Nice.
So yeah,
Jake.
But this.
I'm sending this to you right now, Jake.
Yeah, it is surprisingly cheap, but it's just very simple. It's a very, very small sensor. It's like the size of a sensor in like a cell phone. It's like very, very small.
Yeah.
This is really just designed for planets, because with planets you don't need to capture all the empty space around the planet. You just need to capture the planet itself. So you're cropping really tightly around it in the field of view of your telescope, and then because it's such a small sensor, you can take photos like hundreds of photos per second, which is very necessary when you want to use lucky imaging, which is necessary when you take planet photos.
I guess that
about
it kind of makes
imaging.
It kind of makes sense though, just because like if you think about cameras must be so expensive, but you're like outsourcing the lens cost to the telescope and the processing cost to the computer. So like what else? There aren't many jobs left for the camera to do at that point.
It's being used to hold up my Lego ISS right now, but I actually have a really expensive deep space camera right here. So it's like they can get very expensive. This is like a $5,000 camera, and I use it as a paperweight now. But
like you do, yeah.
But yeah, you can actually spend a lot of money on the camera still, because when you get into a very large sensor, and because there are, when you're shooting deep space, you still want a large sensor for that because you want to see a wider field of view than you do with planets. Right. And there's a lot of technology that actually just goes into keeping the sensor cool. Like there's thermoelectric cooling that goes into the back of these things to keep the sensors cold as possible. So you can do like these 10-minute exposures without the camera picking up its own heat signature as noise. So yeah, tons of technology in getting these cameras just really, really optimized for deep space work. I've got a similar one right now in my observatory that I use for nebulas and galaxies.
You were talking about lucky imaging. Is that like taking a bunch of shots and hoping that you get one that doesn't have as much atmospheric disturbance as the others? Is that what you're referencing there?
Yeah, basically you just take thousands of photos of the planet or whatever you're doing, like a very tight crop of the moon, for example, and you run it through this software which automatically sorts and stacks the photos. So you can say I want to keep the best 30% of these 10,000 photos I'm feeding you, and it will analyze them and then spit out this stacked photo of the best 30%. So it's lucky imaging. It's I think lucky imaging is actually a bit of a misnomer because you're kind of
unlucky imaging. Get all
well,
the planes out of this and give me just the the ones of the moon.
Well, because you're going to actually see like a probability curve of like the amount of photos that are crappy and the amount of photos that are good depending on your conditions. So it's like it's not really lucky. It's more like you're just making your own luck by taking as many photos as possible.
Statistical imaging.
Yeah, that'd almost be a better way to put it.
Astrophotography by attrition. Yeah.
Yeah, really though, you're kind of brute forcing your way into
Yeah,
a photo, because you can't count on the atmosphere being consistent for very long. And the other thing that these do when you're stacking so many thousands of photos is it makes the signal to noise ratio extremely good. And when the signal to noise ratio is like really good, you can sharpen the image without introducing noise. So I'm any kind of photo editor or any kind of photographer is always like you play around with the sharpening slider on Photoshop, and it's like you go too far in one direction and all this noise shows up.
Yeah.
Well, if your signal to noise ratio is very very high in the raw photo, there's basically like no limit to how much you can sharpen it. So you can just like keep pushing that slider over. And it's interesting. It's actually mathematically resolving details that are not visible in the raw photo. So you're because it comes down to just very accurate gradient removal. There's like these like gradients around sharp points. The word for it is called a point spread function, where you have a point and then there's kind of this drop off where it gets blurry, and that's based on just a combination of things like maybe your optics, the atmosphere, but you can actually mathematically subtract that point spread function and mathematically resolve details and things that are very 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 small, like for example moons of Jupiter. You would never see like details in the moons of Jupiter in a raw photo, but you can resolve them with the sharpening, and it's a very mathematical process and it's very very accurate, so you're resolving real details by running it through the sharpening.
That's wild. How do I get that for my Instagram photos? Unlimited sharpening.
I mean, they've got AI sharpening too, which like does the same thing but with fake details.
Yeah, it makes it up.
It makes it up. Yeah, it's like, oh, this photo's blurry here. I'm gonna add like blades of grass that weren't in there before and like new hairs on
extra
your
ear. Yeah.
Just generative fill the rest of the galaxy in.
Yeah.
Add the Horsehead Nebula to this black photo.
Hubble Deep Field was the original generative fill, though. Like, make up what should be in this hole. All right.
Wow.
So Jake's gonna spend a bunch of money on. Well, Jake, if you had to spend a bunch of money right now, are you gonna buy planetary focus stuff first or deep sky stuff?
I mean, probably planets to start with, right? Because I think planets are probably easier. Yell at me if I'm wrong.
Andrew said no. Andrew says no.
I think
not. All right.
I feel like it's easier. I don't know.
It takes the
they're both
artistic
hard in different ways.
variable out, which for some that would be easier though, right? Because like you're saying is your nebula photography, you're making a lot of creative decisions around what to do with it.
With some nebula photography, with narrowband, there's room for interpretation with narrowband nebula photography. But if you're doing like true color, there's actually is a right way to color balance it.
Yeah,
It really depends on like what kind of person you are, honestly. Like if you're like the more then yeah, do some like narrowband nebula photography. You'll have a blast with it. If you're like very like analytical, you're like, oh no, I want to like know the mathematically right way to do this. Planetary photography is very much like it's a hobby, almost discipline. Everything has to be very well collimated. You've got to time your exposures for when the sky is the steadiest, and there's a right, objectively correct way to do it. But it is very difficult because, unfortunately, so much is out of your hands, and it comes down to the atmosphere, which can be really, really frustrating for a beginner when you're like, do everything right, and the picture still sucks.
And you live in the tropics, Jake, so
yeah.
Your video is frozen, so you just look pensive. Oh, you're back. Okay.
Wait a minute. You're right on the Gulf of Mexico, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, you might actually have really good seeing conditions there because the Gulf actually stabilizes the air really good. Like some of the best seeing in the world is like in Texas because of this.
Yeah, it's a little more humid here, so we have that problem, I guess. But But yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think I generally, like, throughout the year, I can go outside and look at a lot of stuff, like just naked eye, just the amount of stars that I can see in my backyard at night, especially compared to the places I've lived. Like, it's pretty good. So yeah.
Yeah, so there is a way you can tell if your atmosphere is steady by looking at the stars too. Because a lot of times that just comes down to light pollution, right? You have too much light pollution, you're not going to see a lot of stars.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at your stars, how much they twinkle actually tells you how good your seeing conditions are. And you can also tell if you see a lot of plane contrails, which is more applicable during the day if you're doing solar photography. But if there's a lot of plane contrails, your seeing is actually going to be worse because the temperature differential between the layers of the atmosphere. But humidity is actually really good for stabilizing air. So the ideal
Oh, really?
ideal conditions for planetary is usually like it's like 70% humidity or something. And you want because like if it's too bad, then it's basically fog, and it'll block too much light from the planet, and you want the planet to be nice and bright still, but yeah, the humidity will actually stabilize the atmosphere. It stabilizes local air currents, so you're not getting it all shaky at high magnifications.
Okay.
Do you
Good
use
to
any
know.
of any tools to, like, when you're looking at, planning out your week and you're trying to see what nights might have good seeing? Do you use any of the tools? Like, I've used Astrospheric in the past, which I tend to like, but I feel like this is probably the super hobbyist level free.fr version of whatever thing you you use. I'm just curious what tools you're using for, like, forecasting.
Also Astrospheric.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's basically
Nice.
the same thing. I just find that the seeing forecast isn't particularly accurate to where a better tool, because there are some other tools out there that some astrophotographers swear by. But I found that the seeing forecast in particular is just always so badly off that the best gauge is to go out there with your telescope and just see what it actually looks like. But otherwise, yeah, I just knowing the cloud forecast.
It's a very like hey Siri, is it raining outside?
Yeah. I don't know. Just freaking look, man.
It's talking to me.
Yeah,
Does it look like it's raining?
It's raining.
I literally walk outside and just see if the stars look extra twinkly. If they look super twinkly, I'm like, I'm not going to bother. And if they don't look very twinkly, then I go, all right, it might be steadier today. Pull out a telescope.
All right, Jake and I at first would say, "Are there stars?" And then go, "Yeah, there's stars. All right, great. All right, are they twinkling?" We have an extra point or two in our workflow. But Astrospheric is awesome. If anyone's not used it, it's just a nice, like, for instance, I'm not bringing the telescope anywhere this weekend. It's just all white. So just go do something else. There's nothing to do.
Yeah.
You'll notice that it tells you when the ISS is going overhead too. You got
Yeah, they did add that. Yeah, that'll be great that I can see it when it's cloudy.
I moved out of the city a year ago too, so I have that going for me, and then I'm like, there's an extra 20 kilometers between me and the lights, which is pretty nice. So I think I'm in a good spot. I think, like, it's a not a bad place to pick it up. I think we'll see.
I want to talk about two things.
We'll see how broke I am
before we run out of time. Number one, Jake's trying to get some planetary stuff, which is cool. The next telescope-based purchases I want to make are more around the sun, and your images lately are not helping me with that desire, because these are unbelievable. I don't know if you've seen this one, Jake. Did I show you this one when we were talking earlier?
I don't think so.
This
this looks incredible.
I am zoomed out right now. This is like unreal. Just to scrolling around this thing in the same way that we were talking about with Nebula, and like scrolling around and seeing what's going on the limbs here. Like, please talk to us about solar imaging.
Right.
Is this where all of your expenses are lately? Go.
It's not as bad as you'd think. So the system I use to capture that photo, it's basically a 5-inch refractor telescope, and it's a doublet, which is, like, if you're familiar with telescopes, it's like on the cheaper end of telescopes, because there's all these corrective optics that go into just basically preserving the right kind of color, because when you pass light through optics, it scatters in weird ways sometimes, and it screws up the colors. So it's like the second cheapest type of telescope. The first cheapest would only have a single optical element. This has 2 optical elements, because you don't need color correction when you're doing solar photography. The reason for that is what I'm using on this telescope. It's a hydrogen alpha filter, but it's a very specifically tuned hydrogen alpha filter. If you just go like, you can go to like a Gina Astro or like Woodland Hills and get like a hydrogen alpha filter for deep space stuff. It will not work to give you really cool solar photos, and that's because the emission line has to be like super narrow. Like the bandpass has to be super narrow, so it's only letting in a half an angstrom of the visual spectrum or the electromagnetic spectrum. Half an angstrom is just like extremely precise on that hydrogen alpha emission line, and if you're off just a little bit, you won't see these details. So the way this thing works, it's like this, basically an attachment that goes into your telescope. It's called the Daystar Quark chromosphere. It's a heat-tuned hydrogen alpha filter. There's an energy rejection filter that goes on it. You plug it into your telescope and then use a monochrome camera. It's got to be monochrome for this, to capture the details of the sun. And the light that's coming through, you can actually look at this visually too, by the way. You can put an eyepiece on the end of this thing and just observe it, which always feels really weird, by the way. If you do like solar astronomy visually, it's like you're just like your brain says, don't look through the telescope because it's the sun. But it's safe. It is safe. So, but you look at it and you can see these like incredible things. You see these like Jupiter-sized prominences hanging off the sun. You can see flares happen in real time. These bright bursts of energy. You can see sunspots, of course, but sunspots are actually really easy to see. You can just use like a neutral density filter basically to see those.
Yeah, I have like the cheap. What's the film called?
It's like Mylar film.
Yeah, I have that for I have a Dobsonian and a little Celestron C90 that I will whip out just to see some sunspots from time to time when I'm bored, or if there's interesting looking ones. But I'm like, man, I gotta get one of these hydrogen alpha setups at some point. What was the name of the thing that you said? It was the Daystar Quark something. Yeah,
the Daystar Quark chromosphere. So paired with this telescope, it's like extremely zoomed in. It's like there's like it's like a 4x Barlow that's like built into the thing, which just magnifies it a lot. So when you're looking through it, or you have a camera set up to it, you're looking at like a very like zoomed in, cropped area of the sun. So all of these photos that you see of like the entire sun, I actually assemble those as mosaics. They're a lot of little photos stitched together, but that's cool because then I get these really detailed photos of the sun. So it's worth it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that's exactly how I got that photo, was with that setup. It is captured with a monochrome camera, and it's a very narrow emission line. So essentially, so the light that's hitting the camera is red. So if you look through it visually, the sun looks red through the filter. But it's captured in monochrome, and then I add this color and processing. So I would say this is like maybe another area we can be a little more creative, because there's no color depth to the sun whatsoever when you're capturing it like this. It's literally it's a flat red that's essentially monochrome, which is why you have to use a monochrome camera to capture it. Otherwise, those extra filters, there's something called a Bayer filter in a camera. That's how you get color photos. If you add that, it actually blocks more of the sun's light, and as a result, you're not going to see these details. So has to be captured in monochrome. But
it's really like that's a funny thing to think about too. It's like the brightest thing in our in our world, it's a single color. Just like, add fun to it later.
I've always loved how like I always loved how like space photography really challenges the idea of like, is it a real photograph, or did you make it up, right? And it's just like,
what does that even mean, man?
On Earth with my phone, it's like very clear what that means, and then in space, it's like very blurry.
Even like true color, anything. You're like, you just mean like true to human eyes. Like, what does that mean? You know, like it's just very
true color. Yeah.
Your eyes are a terrible instrument to determine the color in space, because they basically stop working when things are dim. You know, if I wear a pink shirt in a dark room, you can't tell that it's pink, because that's the way like the photoreceptors in your eyes are working. They're not able to determine color when something's too faint. It's like trying to see what color flowers are in moonlight. You can't. But the color's there. We know the color's there. We know my shirt's pink, but you just can't resolve it.
Just to fix it in Photoshop, then. Yeah. I even definitely I'm into photography of the non-astro variety. I am into the astrophotography part too. I just haven't, taking the dive down the rabbit hole. And I remember like talking to certain friends about like raw photography back in the day, and they'd be like, wait, so like you gotta like do all this processing to like make it look better? And I'm like, well, like when you think about it, like this is how your brain works too. Like it's just capturing the light values.
It's
and
also
then
how your iPhone
mapping
works,
it.
so.
Yeah, right. It's like you just have to like slightly more manual than that, but like it's how everything works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
There's actually a very strong argument that the astrophotos are like some of the most hyper accurate photos, because you do need such precise like color balancing and everything to get a good photo. That like, I mean, if you take a photo with a DSLR and just like nuke the exposures in it, it looks terrible. And that just kind of shows you kind of how crude the the native software inside the cameras are. They are very, very crude because usually it's good enough. Usually your subject's well lit, so it doesn't matter. But astrophotography, it's like it becomes like just hyper accurate because everything is just like so noise free because of the stacking, and then it's very precisely color balanced based on colors of the stars. So it's not even that it's not made up. It's just it's insanely accurate, depending on the type of photo, of course.
We got to talk about this photo that kicked us off for the day. Honestly, like probably my favorite of the moon and iOS. I mean, definitely my favorite of the moon and iOS varieties. Probably my favorite. Like, I don't. It makes me feel like I'm living in the sci-fi universes that we watch and TV shows and stuff.
It's a movie poster, man.
I love this shot. It is amazing. So I'd love to hear. There was a chat Kurt had early on in the feed here of, talking about how a lot of the stuff that we just talked about relied on stacking tons of photos, and obviously with the ISS that's not the case, but with the moon it certainly can be. So how does that come together to make a photo like this possible?
So I do employ stacking techniques for this. It just has to work a little bit differently because obviously the ISS is moving. It moves very quickly. So when I capture these, I'm usually using two telescopes. I'll have one capturing in color, one of them capturing in monochrome. Reason for that is the monochrome, I can usually get better details. I can put an infrared filter on it, which cuts out a lot of the effects of atmosphere scattering and dispersion, which will make the ISS sharper. And then, of course, I just want the color in the photo, so I have to shoot it again in color. And then my field of view is actually very, very tight. It's a very, very small because I'm using a very long focal length because I want to get those really nice details in the ISS. So I take the photo, and then after the ISS passes, I have to go back and build the rest of the moon as a mosaic. So I go back and shoot the missing parts of the moon, basically. So to get a photo like this as crisp as I do want to employ stacking. So the way I do it is I capture the ISS in like 150 frames per second, and it zips across my field of view. I get like 30 or 40 images with ISS in it. Because I'm shooting just at such fast frame rates. And then I take those photos and I actually manually align them in Photoshop. And then crop just around the ISS, and then throw that into my planetary stacking software, so it actually is able to stack these raw photos of the ISS. And then I just choose like a single like master frame of where the ISS was like just exactly where I wanted it to be, and against the moon. And then I use those master frames as masks to incorporate
it's like the composition for the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that it allows me to clean up the noise on the ISS a lot, which allows me to, of course, sharpen it. So I can get better details on the ISS. And then I incorporate the same technique on the moon, just like I would any moon photo. And the resulting image is just like very, very crisp as a result, but also very accurate, because that's always like I guess like a moral dilemma. It's like, how much, if I stack this image, is this now accurate because I'm now just like kind of just compositing in my stacked ISS photo over the original. So I have to like be very true to the original. Get out of here with those people.
Yeah, I'm like, I mean, it's human perception. True is what you saw when you were there, right? Like that's what true means. Right. So like if you were, obviously you wouldn't even see this. You would see a tiny light flying across the sky really fast and a good-looking moon at the time. When you're talking about taking those photos of the ISS itself, you're saying you're setting your camera up for like where the ISS will fly through, and you're capturing it right when it's zipping through frame. And are you doing that only one time, or are you trying to get a couple of moments of it as it traverses the sky?
Well, I really only.
I mean,
have
I guess
time
in this
for one
case, it's
moment.
only where the moon is, right? So there's just like that's your shot right there.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm capturing the ISS by itself, I actually
Right.
have a mount that can track just the ISS. You plug in the telemetry data, and it'll actually track the ISS as
Yeah.
it goes.
The problem is though,
Makes
it will then like it's not the equatorial mount's not going to help you because the ISS is going to be turning as it flies around Earth. It's keeping its it's
Equatorial
pointing.
mounts are not ideal for this because the ISS, it's like small on the horizon, gets biggest when it's straight overhead, and then gets small again when so when it's at its biggest is exactly when the equatorial mount has to do a meridian flip. So you end up losing like the best time, and it's very frustrating because you like want to push it too, and you're like, I'm gonna hit my pier, and then I hit my pier, damn it.
I just meant generally that like it's not equatorial mounts are canceling out the Earth's rotation, but the ISS is rotating around Earth as it's continuing to point prograde, so it's sticking on its heading basically around Earth. So you're gonna capture from the first start of the pass, you're capturing a different angle in the ISS than you are the rest of the way. So like stacking works for that one particular moment when it's in that one spot in the sky, but if you get a couple degrees separated, the ISS its angle is different to you. Yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, you can only stack a very small number of photos. I think I figured out where anything over 5 seconds, and you start to get the motion blur from the ISS shifting. So I stack my ISS photos in like little 5-second increments when I'm doing like a tracked ISS shot. Because exactly what you're describing, it's like you're seeing a car coming down the freeway, and then it like passes you, and you see the side, and then you see it keep driving, and you're seeing its butt.
Going where it's going.
It's changing its angle the entire time it's coming towards you because we live in three-dimensional space.
I mean, the detail that you get on it is just like I literally see the new solar arrays on there. Like,
it's
it's unreal.
That one turned out good. A lot of that comes down to luck because unlike if I'm like, let's say, shooting a planet where I can kind of stay on it for hours, with this I'm kind of at the mercy of like what the atmosphere wants to do in the moment. So I don't share like all my failures. I would say about half of my ISS shots never see the light of day because they look like this but just blurry.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not gonna bother sharing.
Yeah. What am I gonna do with that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's depressing too because I actually drive hours for these because it's such a precise alignment with the moon. So I'm like, all right, I found one that's happening in northern Arizona, and then I drive all the way up there, and then something goes wrong, and I end up not getting the shot. And it's a very long drive back, all depressed with all my equipment.
The time zone on Google Maps is screwed up, and you don't know when you're gonna get there.
Yeah, I always double and triple check the time.
Before we finish, please tell people where to find your work and any particular projects that are going on right now that you would want people to be aware of.
And your calendars.
The calendars.
Oh yeah,
don't give them more work.
I like the work. Packing calendars is
great.
very therapeutic for me. Yeah, go to cosmicbackground.io if you want to buy my calendar. It's right there on the front page. I'm also selling this guy that's like behind me. This it's a composite image of the solar system. It's just kind of a nice benchmark of like kind of how far I've come as an astrophotographer because getting these details on these images is so hard. So I put together kind of like the best of the best shots and create these composites that kind of make for cool art pieces. As you can see, mine makes for cool office decor.
Absolutely. And your Patreon, if you want to plug that. I'm on that thing, and it's awesome.
That's where I throw all of my high resolution stuff, so people can just like download it and make wallpapers for their phones or their desktops. If you have like a 4K monitor, I always everything's like way higher resolution than 4K, so makes for some cool desktop wallpapers.
I'm all about that life, so get on it. Jake, you got your shopping list now?
Apparently, yeah. No, I need to get. I've always had a telescope, and then I sold it when I moved here because it was an international move, and so I think it's time again. I've been talking about it. I think it's time to get back into it and pick a new one. I had a Dobsonian before. I had an 8-inch Dobsonian, and I freaking hated moving it around, man. It was so big and so heavy, and it was like it was as tall as I am, and I needed goddamn cart to drive it around or something. But so I'm gonna look for something that's more like this size that I can like carry in a case and do something with. So I gotta do some.
Tell them
shopping.
which one, Andrew. Tell them which one.
Get an 8-inch SCT. It'll be a little bit more manageable than the 8-inch Dob, and it'll be optimized for planets. SCT, Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope.
Schmidt-Cassegrain, Jake. Come on.
There we go.
Yeah.
Schmidt-Cassegrain.
It'll be a lot more manageable. You're downplaying how the manageability of the 8-inch Dobsonian. I have one of those. It's a battering ram if you need to break in anyone's house. Also.
Yeah.
And the
yeah.
yeah. So.
It wouldn't fit in my car's trunk unless I took it apart. That's how big it was.
So I have a 14-inch Dobsonian.
Yeah. That's a piece of artillery at that point.
What you have to do is get a cover, then an all-weather cover to put over it, so you don't have to move it.
All weather in Arizona, it means a lot of different things than the hurricane zone that Jake and occasionally I live in.
What you do is you buy a Ford F-150 and you just put it into the bed and just stick it right in.
You cut the observatory hole in the roof and there it is.
Brilliant.
Oh dear.
All right, Andrew, thanks so much for hanging out. Jake, next week, I think it's just me and you. We're talking about, we got to catch up on like some Starship stuff and...
Yeah, we have a lot of news to catch up on. So
probably going to read a GAO report.
Yeah, we started to get at it in the pre-show today for all of our Discord supporters. So if you want to see those hot takes, we talked about New Glenn today. That was fun. We didn't get anywhere. Maybe we got somewhere. We got a little bit.
I think we did.
Included some things. We'll see.
Yes, we did. Offnom.com/Discord. Yeah, people are saying, why isn't the pre-show content? And the pre-show is specifically not content. That was not, our goal was to have a non-content thing where we hang out and we, in my case, I drink my first drink during the pre-show and we yell at each other about Dragonfly, which is also a thing we did today. We got a little hot for a second, but
got a little bit, a little spicy, a little toasty. But yeah, no, I'm excited to catch up on some of the news. Yeah, we haven't really talked about Starship at all in any format yet. So
no. And Andrew saw it. We didn't even talk about it one bit. So, yeah, it's great.
That's it. That's great.
So go check out Andrew's Twitter and his website because he's got some photos of that kind of thing.
Yeah, we'll pull him up when we talk about it next week, and then we can feel like we've fulfilled the bit. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks again, Andrew. We will see y'all next week.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.